Hey everyone, thanks for listening this week. So, this episode I recorded with Mark Styczynski. Now, he's a 50 state high pointer who's been on the show before, and he's also organizing this year's convention in South Dakota. And I wanted to bring him on to just give some final details about the convention that I'm sure maybe you've already seen on social media, but he goes into kind of the planning process and the reason behind a lot of things, and also some really special things that they're doing this year at the convention. This will also be my last episode that I'm doing before I take some time off this summer. And in some other news, I will unfortunately not be at this year's convention because I just accepted a job offer and I was unable to negotiate a later start date that would allow me to be at the convention. So I hope everyone there has a lot of fun, and I hope you come back with great stories, and I cannot wait to read everything about it in A to Z and hear all about it. And hopefully I will be able to be at next year's convention in California. And one last note, for those viewing this episode on YouTube, you might notice there are two photos of a man standing on what was formerly called Harney Peak, now called Black Elk Peak, the South Dakota high point. Since I recorded this episode without the camera, I wasn't in my normal recording studio, so I did it with a camera off. I asked Mark if there were any pictures that he wanted me to put on YouTube in place of the video, and he said that he wanted me to put pictures that he had of his dad standing on the South Dakota high point. So those are the pictures that you see on YouTube. So with that, please enjoy my conversation with Mark Styczynski, and I'll be back in September after my break this summer. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Trail Talk High Pointing podcast. The high pointer that we're speaking with today is 50 state high pointer Mark Styczynski, who's also a former guest on the show, and he is in charge of the South Dakota Convention this year. Mark, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Lauren. It's great to be back. I really enjoyed being on your show the first time, and happy to be back to talk, take a deep dive into the specifics of the 2024 convention.
Great. Well, before we get into convention stuff, have you done any high pointing since we last spoke?
I haven't. Well, I guess I have done one high point since we last spoke. So during my second trip out to South Dakota in terms of convention planning, I met up with Dave Coville. So Dave Coville he's the president of High Pointers Foundation, and he's been a magnificent consultant for me throughout this entire process. He's made it, and he's really befriended me a lot too. I've been out there twice. He basically cleared a schedule. I didn't ask him. It's like, oh, is this a good day for you? Is this a good day? Like, I bought my plane ticket and I'm going out these days. And Dave's like, I'll meet you there. So, super guy. So anyway, one of the things that we did on my most recent trip to South Dakota was we went out to North Dakota and we put up some new signage in regards to the High Pointers Foundation. A lot of people are familiar with the benches out there. The South Dakota Trail has been redone. The North Dakota Trail to White Butte has been redone, so it looks completely different than my first visit there in 2006. So I had a chance to hike the Mattahey Trail to the top of North Dakota, and there were a couple benches that had already been installed, but now they got the official High Pointers Foundation plaques on them, and then we put up a High Pointers sign at the trailhead as well. So we did a little bit of work out there. So, we did a lot of convention stuff and then a little foundation stuff. So, it was a good, well-rounded trip. So that is the one high point that I've been to since we last spoke. In terms of other hiking, I finished up a list called the New England 50 Finest a couple weeks ago, which I've been working on for a while.
I saw that. Yeah. So what is that?
So that is the 50 most prominent peaks in the New England states. The measure of a mountain is usually done in elevation, right? But I think, some of your previous guests have talked about the prominence game, and there's the 57 ultras in in the lower 48, which is 5,000 feet of prominence or more. But in the Northeast has 54 or 55, which includes New York State in addition to New England, 2,000 foot prominence peaks. And then within New England, there's a list called the New England 50 Finest, which is the top 50 by prominence, which includes 42 from the Northeast, what they call P2K, 2,000 foot prominence peaks, and then there's 8 more that I did after I finished the 2,000 foot prominence. So that's
Wow.
that's been a fun side project, right? So
Was Mount Washington on that list?
yes, so Mount Washington has the most topographical prominence of any peak in the Northeast because everything basically guides off Mount Washington, which has its prominence is its elevation. So it has 6,288 feet in prominence, in addition to being that high. But then, prominence is like, it's the lowest or the highest low point between two peaks. So there's always a parent peak. So it's interesting. It's different. The Moosehead Lake region of Maine, which is where I finished up, has a lot of 2,000 foot prominence peaks in it, more than the White Mountains, in fact, in New Hampshire, which has a lot of higher mountains because the Moosehead Lake region is so deeply glaciated, right? So they had all those glaciers carving. So you got all these mountains that basically stand on their own because everything else was eroded away.
It's really interesting. So how long did it take you to do this?
So I went through and I realized that I had started 19 years ago, but when I started, I didn't have any thought of doing the prominence peaks. It really started, I think we talked about in the last podcast how one list leads to another.
That's right.
So during the, and I'm not a county high pointer, but during the pandemic, a lot of options were off the table in terms of travel. So I realized, I think I got in a conversation with Stony Burke, who before living in Texas was a Northeast guy, a New England guy. Okay. He has a huge knowledge base, even now, on New England mountains, and we're always engaging with each other about this or that. So he told me he's like, hey, you should work if you've done these mountains in Vermont. You should only have a small handful left to do the county high points in Vermont. In Vermont, every county is mountainous. So I realized there's 14 counties in Vermont, and I've done 9 of them. So it's like, okay, so it's a list of 5. So this is like a small bite. So in the course of finishing those last 5 county high points in Vermont, I realized, I go on peakbagger.com like a lot of your guests do, and it's like Signal Mountain, like, which is a bushwhack peak. I'm like, oh, look at that. In addition to being a county high point, it's also a 2,000 foot prominence peak in the Northeast. And then another one of them, East Mountain, up in the what they call the Northeast Kingdom. That's a 2,000 foot prominence peak too. So now I'm looking at the 2,000 foot prominence peaks, and it's like, I had a lot of them. I think I had like probably 40 plus out of the 54. 54, it's 55. It gets confusing. There's one mountain that it's either Kibbe or Caribou, so a lot of people wind up doing both. But I'm like, okay, well, that's a list of like 14 or 15 that I can work on, as I feel like it. So then I finished the Northeast, 2,000 foot prominence peaks at the end of 2021, I think it was. And I said, well, I've got 42 of the New England 50 Finest, so I might as well finish them too.
Wow.
So the thread kind of ends with the New England 50 Finest. There's if I want to do another list, I'm going to have to go find another list. But it's just cool how, you start one project and it leads to another project and it leads to another project.
Yeah. Wow, that's really cool. I mean, I always find it interesting when I speak with 50 state high pointers again, and they're never done. I mean, of course, you completed the list of lists, as far as the High Pointers Club is concerned, but you're never done. There's always going to be something else, because I think naturally we get into high pointing because we like lists.
Yes.
Because we like goals and because we like the outdoors. So there's always going to be something else. And I really enjoy finding out what that is for 50 state high pointers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've said many times that this is my last list. This is my last list. I'm done with lists after this one. And then the next thing I know, I'm waist deep in another list. So,
Yeah.
I
Well, let's get to the convention planning. We're getting pretty close to the dates now. What I know that a lot of listeners follow along on social media. They follow the High Pointers Club. They follow the 50 States High Pointing Facebook group, where updates are being posted. For those maybe who don't follow on social media, what do you want them to know?
okay. Well, hopefully, if you're attending the High Pointers Club convention, that you're a convention, or yeah, not a convention member, but a High Pointers Club member. So a lot has been communicated in the last three issues of Apex to Zenith. The summer issue is I know you had Tom and Tommy on your
That's
last
right.
episode, or a recent episode, depending on when this airs. And the Q2 Summer 2024 issue is out. It actually just arrived at my house the day before yesterday,
Right.
and has the latest updates from South Dakota. We changed the watermelon feast location. That's a big update for people who were expecting it to be at Sylvan Lake. It's still going to be in Custer State Park, but it's going to be it's going to be at Stockade Lake instead,
Okay.
right near the George Stockade, and not too far from the shore of the lake. So there'll be some things to do with that. And then just going through, I kind of like detailed it all. Got information on the Black Elk Peak hike on Friday the 19th. Some information about parking at Custer State Park. We have a big day planned on the 18th, um, which should be pretty fun. Have kind of a Native American theme.
Right.
We have lined up a fantastic speaker that I decided to for lack of a better word, pursue for the convention after finding some of his books online. There was a C-SPAN video of him out at specifically Bear Butte, and I was like, oh, this gentleman, this scholar, would be absolutely fantastic, and developed a good rapport with him. Met with him, actually had lunch with him
Wow.
during our last trip out to South Dakota. Got to know him pretty well, and looking forward to that hike. And he's leading a program on the morning of Thursday, July 18th, um, that, which will include a hike up to the top of Bear Butte in Bear Butte State Park, which is near Sturgis, not too far from Rapid City. But then there's going to be a lot more. There's going to be a lot of history of the region. Bear Butte is considered the most of the sacred Indian peaks, as they're known. He has a lot of personal family history associated with Bear Butte, and he's going to do his thing, so to speak. And it's not a terribly long hike, but it's not going to be like a power up and down the mountain kind of thing. It's going to be, we'll get to a certain point, and he'll talk about whatever he's going to talk about. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then later on that same first day, there's going to be an event at Crazy Horse Memorial.
Oh, wow.
So
Is that the same Crazy Horse like monument that's in construction right now?
yes, it's actually been in construction since, believe it or not, the late 1940s. I think
Oh,
1948. And it was back in those days. It was like one guy. So this guy apparently, and I don't want to say it wrong, but he had originally worked on Mount Rushmore and then had some artistic differences with the people at Mount Rushmore who were constructing Mount Rushmore, and wound up meeting with Native Americans in the area, and this whole Crazy Horse Memorial was project was born. And at first, it was just him with a chainsaw, and basically a chainsaw and a chisel, going up and starting it. And
wow.
it has turned into a huge construction project, and it's all privately funded. They don't take any money from the government. You can imagine why they would not particularly trust the government, right? And they got a huge new like $1 million crane this year, and it's actually the grandkids of the original carver constructor that are basically running everything now. Like, his name is escaping me. We're actually, if you go to the program, there's actually going to be a movie before we do anything that lays out all of it. And one of his grandkids has said that it will be done by the end of his lifetime. So
Wow.
that's his goal. And his grandkid is still younger, right? Early 30s or something like that. So it's not like it's going to get done tomorrow. But when I was first out there with my dad in 2006, he couldn't even really get close to the memorial at that time. And we went to see it, and it was kind of like way off in the distance, and we ran into a gate, and it's like, well, we can't go any further than that. And then I went back out there last year, and I was, it was as my first convention planning trip, and I was just stunned at how much further along it was. And it was, they have pictures of it now on the wall, or during that trip, they did the Rapid City Airport, really selling this. And, it's just like, wow, it's just so much further along than it was just, what's that? It was 17 years at the time, 18 years now.
That's great.
So yeah, it's quite an elaborate project. So I'm pretty excited about that. And and the Thursday stuff that we're doing is kind of different than some previous conventions. Usually, the conventions will kick off with the Thursday evening social. And just one of the cool things about this, and I'm going to call it a job because it's really a job, is that the club president Shannon really, after this whole thing happened, that I became the convention host, which I told that story how that all happened. So in the first episode, if anybody wants to go back and see it, but I'm not gonna rehash how I wound up becoming convention host. But she has given me like free reign to create my own convention. Right? It's like I have a completely blank palette, and I can fill it in however I want. And I made the decision pretty early on that I wanted to do some different things. I wanted to, put my personal stamp on it is the right way of doing it. But I was like, people are coming in. A lot of people are coming in Thursday. I want to give them some things to do on Thursday. A lot of conventions, they have, there'll be an organized hike to a county high point. And I was like, we're here in South Dakota. We're in the Black Hills. We have Crazy Horse, and I got, this was a conversation I had with Dave at the bar one night after, our first round of, doing the things that we had to do. When we visited sites in September, it was like trying to pick a site. So we had a bunch of different venues that we visited, and like, what do you have to offer? What do you have to offer? What's the cost? What are your facilities like? Before ultimately deciding on the Ramkota. But then, after each day, we'd go and we'd shoot the breeze, and we both got talking, and Dave is very familiar with hiking pretty much everywhere, but
Sure.
he's been to he's very familiar with the Sacred Indian Peaks. So he's done a lot of them himself. And we got talking about, wouldn't it be, instead of doing a county high point, why don't we do a hike of, one of the Sacred Indian Peaks? And it's like, oh, why don't we get somebody from the local Native American community to be involved in it? And we can do Crazy Horse too, and it can be like a whole theme day, right?
Wow.
So
yeah,
that's kind of where we wound up with it, and super excited about it. And, as Harney, Black Elk Peak used to be called Harney Peak, and as it turned out, Harney was a pretty bad dude. So now the peak, the high point of South Dakota, now has a more appropriate name probably, and kind of like McKinley was renamed to Denali,
you're right.
the original native thing. So
Yeah.
that's all of what's going on Thursday. And there's so many different things and pieces of the puzzle that you have to consider. It's like last year, Georgia, right? So most, I should say, not everyone, but where the convention winds up, you know, dictates a lot about any attempt of the actual high point of that state, right? So
Hmm.
Georgia, you can drive most of the way up it, right? You can get
That's right.
to within 0.6 of a mile of the top. So for the sake of the club hike last year, it was fairly easy. It's like we drove from the Unicoi Lodge, which was the host site of the Georgia Convention, and then we did the group hike of Brasstown Bald. Had the watermelon feast right in the parking lot, and it was from a planner's perspective, which is the perspective that I um, it was pretty easy, right? You can boom, 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 do all those things on Saturday, and I guess the first thing and there's been a lot of things that have caused some stress, right?
Sure.
So like one of the first things that I was measuring, it's like, okay, so last year they did the High Pointers Foundation board meeting in the morning, and then after that they had the club hike with the watermelon feast, and then came back in the afternoon and had the High Pointers club meeting that afternoon, and then they had the banquet. And I'm like, it's not going to work like that. It's not that simple for South Dakota because it's just by its shortest route. South Dakota is about a 7 mile round trip hike.
Yeah.
And like, how am I gonna attach the watermelon feast to the club hike? Because everybody's going to be hiking at their own pace. It's not truly a group hike. It's like, okay, the morning of Friday, July 19th, we're all going to go as individuals because there are certain restrictions within the national forest. There's like what they call a 25 heartbeats rule. You can't be in a group of more than 25 people. You start in Custer
Okay.
State Park, which doesn't care about the size of your group, but then about a mile and change into the hike, you cross over into the National Forest, and the National Forest Service does care about the size of your group.
Okay.
So it's like everybody, we're all going to be on the trail at the same time, but we got to be careful not to, cluster, so to speak.
Okay.
So as a result of that, it's like we can't say the hike starts at time A and ends at time B, and then at time B we're going to have the watermelon feast. It's like we just got to do the watermelon feast completely separately of the club hike. It's just not going to work. It's going to be a logistical nightmare. So based on that, we said, well, we can have the watermelon feast. We can have it be a standalone event on Saturday, before the banquet, and that created some other issues in terms of, well, trying to squeeze both the board and foundation meetings in on the Saturday on either side of it. So we wound up saying, like, okay, so after the Black Elk Peak hike, everybody's going to be back at the Ramkota, or you can be back at the Ramkota if you so choose, if you start your hike early enough by late afternoon. So we're going to have the foundation meeting, the High Pointers Foundation meeting at the Ramkota on Friday afternoon. And
Okay.
then that's going to be followed by the High Pointers Club meeting on Saturday morning. And then as soon as that's over, the buses are going to be leaving the Ramkota for the watermelon feast.
Great.
So ultimately we didn't want to try to squeeze something in between 3:30 when the buses get back to the Ramkota and 6 o'clock when the banquet starts, just in case there's traffic. It's like you can't have. I mean, if you get stuck for 2 hours in traffic just randomly, there's a car accident or whatever, then all of a sudden, the foundation meeting gets blown up or the club meeting gets blown up. Which you definitely don't want that. So
Yeah, there's a lot of planning is not just how you want things to go. And I think that's all very well laid out. You gave people time to get from A to B while also considering the fact that it's tourist season in a
Right.
very popular spot.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I tried to plan the schedule out in a way that, you know, every event is going to be guaranteed, right? That there's not going to be like some random thing that happens that, this one thing that people have been looking forward to gets completely wrecked because of it.
Mhm.
So, and like I said, I was talking to Scott Drummond, the club treasurer, this last weekend, and he's really stepped up to the plate, recently in terms of, offering some assistance as well. And I told him, I said, Scott, this is the first national convention I've ever planned, so it's, there's been a learning curve for me too, right? And
Sure.
I'm thinking about things that I never thought about. Um, and it's been like and I told my wife, I said, this has been like a whole life experience. I mean, this is like I agreed to this, but then I have like thrown myself into it. There have been good things, there have been bad things, the whole game.
Well, you're almost like a project manager because there's a start date and there's an end date to this. And
Yes,
you're taking
yes.
care of everything in the middle and there's a lot of logistics.
And I'm at a point now too where it's like the convention is essentially planned, right? All the big pieces are in place. Most of the little pieces are in place. It's kind of like moving from planning to execution. And I can see the reinforcements coming, on the far horizon at this point. And I'm at a point like what ultimately what I want to happen is I want the energy, the club, and the people to kind of like take over, and the less people think about me or the less people talk about me when the actual convention starts, that's good, because that means that I did my job right, and that means that things are running smoothly. If things start going badly, and I have a pretty harsh internal critic, right? And there's this part of me that's saying this is going to go down like the Hindenburg mark. You just wait. And but if I've done everything well and everything is laid out well, there'll be there's parts of it that I'm going to have to manage when I get there. But ultimately, I like to enjoy it as much as possible as just a regular attendee, and everybody's in the mercantile is doing the mercantile thing, the convention crew is doing the convention crew. The speakers that I've lined up are doing their jobs. The bus company is doing its job when it shows up, and I can just kind of like step back and like look at it and pop my head in here and there, and everybody, hopefully everybody will be having a great time. We crossed the 200 threshold this morning, so we got more than
Great.
200 people that are going to be attending the convention. We're still, as of the minute of this recording, we're still 7 weeks out. So there's a potential for it to be in the very upper echelon of total attendance for conventions. I don't know what the most popular convention ever was. I think it's over 300, and I think I got an email the other day that I think there's been 5 that are over 250. So it's going to be a well attended convention, and one of the things I saw online yesterday and I think you saw it too, on the 50 States High Pointers Facebook page, was, so there's a picture of John Mitchler with Don Holmes, just
Oh, in the book. You said you ordered it, right?
yeah, he authored the book. And when I did the 50 State High Points, the second edition of High Points of the United States went everywhere with me. It's all marked up. It's like every time I did a state, I like highlighted it with my little orange highlighter pen. So John Mitchler and Don Holmes and his book, and then I got Stony Burke. We got Stony Burke chiming in saying, "Oh, yeah, this is going to be great. I can't wait to see you both at the convention." And I'm like, "All right,
That's a good plug.
yes, that's what it's a good plug." But then it's like, it's like, all right, it's like that is what I like to see. It's what,
Right. People are referencing it as a meeting place
right
for other high pointers.
the reference it as a meeting place, and it sounds like they're looking forward to it, and there's been a lot of stuff that I'm I'm doing this like round the clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'll be working on spreadsheets and whatnot. But then to see like people actually, be excited about going to the convention, it's like, very positive reinforcement.
You're right. So, what part are you most looking forward to?
I am most looking forward to, I think, Thursday. The two events on
Yeah.
Thursday. That's that. I don't know. Like I have a personal connection to that, for lack of a better word. It's like
Yeah.
I'm very excited about the Bear Butte hike. I'm very excited about the Crazy Horse Memorial event. And beyond that, I'm looking forward to all of it. I mean, I know that sounds kind of cheesy, but um, it's only my second convention I've ever attended. Last year, Georgia was the first convention that
Okay.
I attended, and there were a lot of people that I'd known in an online capacity for years and years and years, and I finally got to meet them and whatnot. But then I went off and I did my own thing a little bit. I did the Georgia Brasstown Bald hike via the Jack's Knob Trail, I believe. So from the bottom, I climbed it, and then I went out to Klingman's Dome, and then and I popped in and out of the convention. I was like kind of a fly on the wall for the most part until all of a sudden I wasn't.
Until you were chosen.
Yeah, it was like what? It's like the Hunger Games or something. It's like you've been chosen.
Yeah.
But so the watermelon feast where we wound up at Stockade Lake near the George Stockade is actually the third location for the watermelon feast. Originally, it was going to be at Sylvan Lake, and it seemed like the perfect site. And there's not much about Sylvan Lake that's not perfect. But I had to, as part of the process, I had to apply for a special events permit with Custer State Park. It's actually South Dakota park system that it started with. And that has to go through multiple levels of approval. So I put the permit in for having the watermelon feast at Sylvan Lake. And it went through the first layer of approval. It went through, and they said, you should hear back in a couple of weeks. So a couple of weeks go by, and I haven't heard anything back. So I reach out by phone to the place that runs the special events permits for all of South Dakota, and they said, oh yeah, I approved it, and now it goes to the site. It goes to specifically Custer State Park, and gives me the name of the gentleman. First name is Levi at Custer State Park. That basically is the decider of all things when it comes to special events in Custer State Park. I can say, as Mark, the convention host, we're going to have our watermelon feast at Sylvan Lake, but if Levi doesn't want it at Sylvan Lake, it's not going to be at Sylvan Lake. So it started the conversation with him, and he made a lot of good points. He didn't say no, but he was like, Mark, it's like, think about this and think about this. It's going to be Saturday at noon in the height of the season. It's going to be, a parking nightmare. It's going to be hard for you guys to find space to do what you want to do. He goes, have you thought about Stockade Lake? And this started the whole thing, email volley with me and Shannon and Dave, and that it's like, this is sounding like kind of like a smart thing to do. To people will have just had been at Sylvan Lake the day before, to do the Black Elk Peak hike. So in addition to all these other reasons that Levi with the Custer State Park system laid out, it makes sense that people aren't necessarily, with so much to do. Like, are people really going to want to go back to the exact same place 2 days in a row? That's a 50-mile or a 50-minute drive from the Ramkota. So eventually, when we went out there in April, Levi, he took me and Dave out to this idyllic location on the backside of Stockade Lake, in its own private area. It had a gazebo and everything, perfect. And me and Dave left, and we're like really excited about this. Get back home, get back to New York. Levi calls me up. He's like, Mark, oh man, we're booked out on that place for that day. Like, I'm really sorry. But we can still do Stockade Lake, but there's an area, and he goes, I've highlighted it in yellow, right near the parking lot, near the George Stockade. He goes, will that work? And at that point, it's like it's going to have to work. But it was also a great location because the George Stockade. I looked into it. It's pretty cool. So it's something for people to do when they're at the watermelon feast. But then it also loosens up parking. There's not a ton of parking there, but the first two locations, Sylvan Lake and the private area on the backside, people would have been pretty much required to ride the buses to get there. But now it's like you can take the bus or you can drive. And so we're like offering both. And actually, Scott there's going to be an email by the time this airs. The email will be out that Scott is going to email everybody that signed up for the convention and say, hey, you might want to consider this. You can get on the bus. We're trying to figure out how many buses we need as part of it. Because I've gotten very light response to the bus thing. I put in one of the Apex to Zenith, and it's like, please contact South Dakota Convention 2024 at gmail.com if you're going to take the bus. And I was talking about it at home. It's like I don't necessarily think that I ever thought that a ton of people were going to write that email and taking the bus, but I mean, I've had like less than 10 people tell me that they're taking the bus. Well, at the same time, I know people are going to be taking the bus.
So well, what you could do is leverage the social media presence that the High Pointers Club has on Instagram and Facebook.
Yes.
And ask them to make a post about it.
Yes, and actually, so Scott wrote up a nice post to that effect, right? And I have it in my inbox. But I just put out the thing on highpointers.org. I don't know, a few days ago with it's like, hey, if you want to get the bargain rate at the Ramkota, make sure
I saw that. Yeah.
So I'm not like trying to inundate High Pointers org with too much convention stuff all at the same time. So
sure.
I told Scott, I said, I'll give it a few weeks. I'll wait a few weeks, and then I'll put that email about the buses and the watermelon feast up.
Well, I would venture to say that this is also a practical platform to get that information out. So if listeners want to take a bus, I will provide the information that you need to contact Mark and indicate that.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great. Right now, what we have contracted with Dakota Trailways is 3 56-person tour buses. And I have spent a lot of time thinking about this. I've never thought I would think so much about buses in my life, but here I am. And I'm like, that's capacity for 168 people. Now we're going to have probably 225 to 250 people at the convention. I'd say that's a pretty safe estimate. It's going to be somewhere in that ballpark. I know a lot of people aren't going to take buses. I know a lot of people are going to, go to the watermelon feast, park there, have the watermelon, and then go do something else cool in the area instead of wanting to be. Because if you're attached to the bus, you're attached to the bus, right? You leave at the Ramkota at 10:30, and you get back at 3:30, and that's pretty much your day. I think there's a lot of people that are going to want more to their day than just the watermelon feast. So I'm like, I don't think we need. The last thing, we got like all these budget, like intense budget talks, right? And I don't want to pay or have the convention pay for empty buses. And I don't want to throw away food. It's like, so we're at this point now where it's like everything is planned, but it's like, how much of this do we need? How much of that do we need? What's the right formula here? So anyway, so we're actively encouraging people at this point, both from the perspective as a convention attendee, you don't have to take the bus to get to the watermelon feast. We're going to have buses because we promise buses, and it's also responsive to, we understand that the site of the Ramkota is a good little bit, I think it's 35 miles, but it's not all highway or anything like that to get to, Custer State Park and Black Hill Peak Trailhead. So there's a little bit of a drive, and we don't want people to be having to drive back and forth. So the bus option is going to be there for anybody that wants to take the bus.
Well, that's really good information. And, we can say the buses will be available for this event. There are this many spots open. Reserve your spot now and leave it at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the email that Scott Brumman is drafting is, kind of saying, hey, there's these other things to do right in the same area that, if you stop by the watermelon feast at noon, have your watermelon and you're gone by, 1:00, you still have a lot of afternoon left before the convention at 6:00. So, these are some other things in that general area that you can do. So he's kind of like taking that on. I appreciate any help that I get on this. And, as the convention gets closer, there's going to be less and less Mark and more of everybody else doing their own thing. In terms of projecting how many people are going to be at the convention, it's like, all the old models have been broken, right? Because it's like I looked at Tony's numbers from last year, and it's like, all right, so it went like there were nobody in January, there was nobody in February, there was like 2 people in March or whatever it was, and then it like shot up, right?
Okay.
But I was thinking it was going to follow kind of like the same thing, right? But then we have online registration, this year, and online registration goes live like right after the holidays. I forget the exact day. It was like the beginning of January, and I had like 58 people registered by the end of January. I'm like, what? It's like this is
Yeah.
I was not supposed to have 58 people register for the convention in January. I did not see that coming.
Your skills in planning are just so refined because you're not only highlighting the high point and the surrounding attractions, but also you're making, or what's the right word? You're having everyone learn about the heritage of the location and the history. And I think that is really important because I think people are going to leave South Dakota with a very, very special experience that maybe most tourists would not leave with had they just visited Mount Rushmore and maybe even climbed Black Owl Peak and done a couple parks. I think we're really immersing ourselves with the location, and that's all thanks to your planning.
Well, thank you, absolutely, and that is certainly one of my hopes. The first time I went out to the Dakotas, when I was in the heart of my high pointing career, it was me and my dad, right? And you can make, when you're on your own trip, you can make it whatever you want. But, you go to a big event like this and, kind of the energy of the event kind of takes over a little bit. And you become part of that, right? And just trying to, my goal all along has been to, try to provide people with an experience that goes beyond, going to the convention and, and having food, right? A lot of the money I'm spending is on food. I've been like really thinking a lot about, planning cool events and, hopefully those events will be well attended, but, at the end of the day, people are going to do the things that, they want to do. So, those options are available, but, if people choose to, they want to go off and do their own thing. They want to go off and visit Wind Cave or Jewel Cave or Mount Rushmore or the 7,000 other cool things there are to do, when they're in Rapid City instead of, the organized events. It's like, yeah, no, I totally get that. It's like, you're, in addition to going on a vacation, or to a convention, you're on your own personal vacation as well. So it's all about options, right? And I am, hopeful that I get to see you and your family out there. But for the reasons you were explaining before we went on air, I totally get it if it doesn't come together, right?
Yeah. Well, before I had done any interviews for these jobs, I had everything planned out because I was going to be out there for like a week and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And do all the things you mentioned: Wind Cave, Jewel Cave, Badlands, Theodore Roosevelt, White Butte, and then everything at the convention. Then I was going to go over to Devil's Tower, and I was going to hire a guide to climb it.
That's cool.
Yeah. So that's like for all those reasons. And I was going to bring, of course, my daughter and someone to watch her while I, do all those things, because my husband is actually deployed right now. And he'll be back in December. So just figuring all this out it's a lot.
Yeah.
A lot going on, but I thought I had it all planned. I want to do those high points. And I also, one of my other lists is national parks, not necessarily national park high points, although if I do it, cool, but just to see them and now to bring my daughter along with. So that, it's another place that I want to go to for that reason too.
Nice.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, you certainly have your hands full. I mean, a lot of respect to you, being a young mom and, going out, getting a job and then doing this podcast on the side. Your plate is full as the goes.
Yeah, it is. And of course, the Army just picked a perfect time for my husband to deploy.
Yeah, no, that's life though, right?
Yeah. But anyway, Mark, this has been a lot of fun and it's been very informative. And I really appreciate your time coming onto the show and also everything that you've done for the convention and for the high pointing community. This is an event that a lot of us are waiting to attend, and we're all excited about it. And it could not have happened without your effort and your work. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. And thank you for the platform to talk about it. I'm certainly looking forward to the convention. I put all of myself into